Hey guys, tonight we're headed somewhere dry, starlit, and surprisingly well-organized, ancient Babylon. The air smells faintly of baked clay and river reeds. Your sandals crunch over the packed dust as you cross a wide avenue flanked by lion mosaics. Ahead, the ziggurat looms, part temple, part observatory, part royal flex. You climb slowly, step by step, feeling the warm stone beneath your fingers as the sky opens above you. There's no smog, no blinking airplanes, just an ocean of stars, and not a single clock in sight. Still, somehow, these people know what time it is. Not just what hour, what era. What god is in season. Whether that pale dot just above the horizon means good news for the king, or a bit of inconvenient dying. Now, you probably wouldn't last a week here. Between the heat, the strict hairstyles, and the occasional forced labor, ancient Babylon is no vacation. But as far as timekeeping goes, they've got something figured out. Something older than sundials and far weirder than your smartwatch. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice is how alive the sky feels here. Not metaphorically, literally alive. Each star has a name, a mood, a preference for drama. You're introduced to the constellation we call Orion. Though tonight he's not a hunter, he's a loyal servant of Marduk, the chief god, quietly sweeping the heavens in ritual procession. Far to the east, the Pleiades twinkle like tiny divas, whispering secrets to the moon. A temple priest in a floor-length robe nods to you with tired, sand-crusted eyes. He's been awake since dusk. His job? Watching. Just watching. The stars, the moon, the odd bird. He scratches something onto a clay tablet with a stylus, muttering about Jupiter being 2 fingers off its expected rise. See, in Babylon, astronomy and religion are stitched together like seams in a temple garment. You're not just tracking stars, you're reading the divine diary. Every planet has its own personality. Venus, moody and seductive. Saturn, slow and deeply judgmental. Mars, the guy at the back of the celestial bar who starts fights just by showing up. But it's not just for fun. Star behavior affects crops, marriages, and wars. If Venus lingers too long in the west, people get antsy. If the moon glows orange on the wrong night, a prince might mysteriously retire from his position. Mainstream historians agree, Babylonian astronomy was detailed, regular, and far ahead of its time. But here's the twist, historians still argue whether it was science or just organized superstition. The Babylonians didn't separate magic from math. They didn't even try. You sit beside a young apprentice with ink-stained fingers and a habit of yawning during omens. He points upward and rattles off names. Emuel, the Plough Star, the Great Twins, the True Shepherd of Anu. These aren't your modern constellations. Some overlap with Greek patterns, others are completely different, like a parallel universe of celestial maps. One fringe theory says the Babylonians used star names to encode social rules, like which family could marry whom, or whether a merchant owed taxes. Probably not true. Still, it's fun to imagine some poor trader pointing at Orion and shouting, "See? That's my uncle. You can't tax me during Taurus." The apprentice leans over, whispering that Apin, the Plough Star text, holds all the key timings: when stars rise and set, when the moon goes sulky, when Jupiter throws a tantrum. It's not a calendar exactly, more like an interstellar farmer's almanac carved into clay, often copied and recopied by bleary-eyed scribes in dim torchlight. You notice something else. Babylonian time isn't linear. It's cyclical, intimate, and vaguely judgmental. The stars don't march, they repeat. They gossip. They hold grudges. And unlike your phone's weather app, they don't refresh automatically. Above, a particularly bright star flickers on the edge of visibility. Sirius, the priest murmurs, arrives late this year. You ask what that means. He doesn't answer, just sighs, as if the consequences are both obvious and inevitable. Which, for him, they probably are. A quiet wind stirs the hem of your tunic. You settle back against warm stone, letting your eyelids droop. The stars are still busy, still arguing, still whispering secrets to the patient, ever-watching Babylonians. You wonder, how many nights like this have they recorded? How many clay tablets now lie buried beneath your feet, holding all the answers, or none at all? You're climbing. The ziggurat stairs are wide and shallow, designed less for speed and more for ritual pacing. Your breath comes slow as you ascend, past carved bricks and faded glaze. Each layer of the temple steps higher into the night sky, each level pulling you further from the smoke of cooking fires and the braying of goats. You reach the uppermost terrace, a platform open to the stars, lined with incense burners and suspiciously comfy mats. This apparently is where the real watching happens. Tonight, you're in the company of the temple's stargazers, priests, scribes, and a few sleep-deprived apprentices. They carry styluses like modern scientists carry clipboards, ready to jot down the slightest flicker or shift. But instead of telescopes, they've got their most sacred tool, height. In Babylon, the higher you get, the closer you are to the gods, and the clearer your view of their mood swings. One priest gestures toward a brass stand with a small notch cut into the rim. It looks like a primitive ruler, but it's actually a sighting tool, aligning certain stars as they rise over the city's distant hills. The notch frames Aldebaran tonight, just peeking up like a glowing ember. "It's late," the priest mutters. "Bad for barley." You glance down at the city below. From this height, the grid-like streets resemble lines drawn into clay. Temples, canals, market stalls. The whole city spread beneath a tapestry of constellations. It's breathtaking, and let's be honest, a little unsettling. Everyone down there believes the sky has a plan. Here's something mainstream scholars agree on. Babylonian astronomers kept very accurate records of star positions and timings. They didn't use telescopes or advanced math, but they understood how celestial bodies moved. Ziggurats like this one functioned like enormous stationary observatories. No gears, no dials, just stone platforms and human memory. You're watching a civilization track Saturn by sheer patience. They even built observation rooms with slots in the walls, long, narrow windows cut to frame a particular point on the horizon. When a certain star passed through the window's view, that meant the season was turning. The rain might come, the river might flood, the festival of Ishtar might begin, or be cancelled due to ominous fog. Fringe historians occasionally claim the ziggurats doubled as giant calendar computers, each level corresponding to a month, a planet, or a god's mood. It's a romantic theory, and kind of fun to picture the high priest shouting, "Quick! Mars is halfway up the third terrace. Cancel all weddings." But no serious evidence backs that idea yet. Still, the ziggurat's usefulness is clear. It gives you distance, perspective. If a star rises even slightly off its usual track, someone will notice. And when you're trying to track time without clocks, noticing everything becomes the entire job. One apprentice, barely old enough to grow a respectable beard, asks if you want to try measuring a lunar angle. He hands you a simple device, a length of string with knots tied at intervals. You squint at the moon, hold the string taut between two fingers, and measure how many knots it takes to span from the horizon to the silver disk. That's your unit, your data. It's not perfect, but Babylon doesn't need perfection. It needs patterns, repetition, enough nights of string measuring, and you'll know when eclipses might happen, or when the moon will look especially annoyed. Historians still argue whether these string-based observations led to mathematical breakthroughs or just fed astrology charts. Did the ziggurat priests truly care about objective science? Or were they just making sure no one got cursed by a cranky Saturn? You rest your elbows on the warm stone railing. The wind tastes of river mud and distant fire. A constellation shaped like a scorpion emerges from behind a veil of clouds. One of the priests mutters, "The scorpion bites at midnight." You're not sure if that's literal or poetic. In Babylon, it might be both. Here's something weird. There's no ticking, no bells, no hourly chime from a dusty clock tower. Time up here isn't chopped into minutes. It's stretched. It flows by observation, not division. A priest points out how one star kisses the ziggurat edge right before dawn. That's how they know the night is ending. Not from any sundial, but from a twinkle in the heavens brushing the bricks of a holy tower. A light joke is whispered among the apprentices. Miss the star kiss, and the temple rooster takes your job. It's not a great joke, but they've been up all night. Everything's funny by hour 4 of lunar duty. As dawn hints on the horizon, the scribes gather their tablets. They press stylus to clay, inscribing what they've seen. Venus, 4 fingers high at 3rd watch. Moon dimmed by cloud. No omen recorded. Jupiter steady. Good for court trials. One priest folds a cloth over the sighting notch like he's tucking it in. You realize something. These observations aren't just about time. They're about comfort, about control, about pretending the chaos of weather, war, and crops can be soothed by writing down what Venus did last Tuesday. You descend slowly, step by step. The sky fades to lavender. The gods withdraw behind the clouds. But you know now they'll be back. And when they return, someone will be watching from above. By the time you reach the scribe's chamber, your sandals are coated in fine dust, and you've developed a new appreciation for how often people in ancient Babylon must have stubbed their toes on things in low light. The room is dim and cluttered, the air dry and faintly smelling of reed ink, burned cedar, and the unmistakable musk of someone who's been copying clay tablets for 16 years without a holiday. You're inside the intellectual engine room now, the place where star-watching becomes legacy. Shelves of clay tablets stretch along every wall, each inscribed with tiny wedge-shaped cuneiform characters. And let's be honest, if paper had existed, someone would have spilled pomegranate wine on it by now. But clay? Clay endures. A young scribe sits cross-legged on a mat, hunched over a damp piece of clay with the posture of someone born to be nearsighted. He dips a stylus made of bone into a pot of water and carves with slow, deliberate pressure. You peer over his shoulder. He's working on something called the Enuma Anu Enlil, an enormous collection of star omens. There are over 7,000 entries. You resist the urge to whisper, "Buddy, get a hobby." But this isn't just busy work. These tablets are how Babylon keeps its memory. When Venus rises before the sun in the month of Samanu, something always seems to happen. A drought, a border dispute, the king's barber suddenly vanishing under mysterious circumstances. So they write it down, every flicker, every appearance, every eerie orange moon. The scribe explains that their task is not to interpret, but to record. The stars speak to those who watch often enough, he says, without even looking up. It's oddly comforting, like a celestial diary kept by extremely punctual librarians. Mainstream scholars agree, Babylonian star records were some of the most consistent in ancient history. They used a sexagesimal, base 60 numbering system. Yes, that's where our 60 minutes and 360 degrees come from. But here's the plot twist. They didn't use these numbers the way we do. For them, 60 wasn't just a base, it was sacred. Everything divisible by 60 made the gods happy, or at least stopped them from throwing a fit. You spot a table covered with old tablets, cracked and flaking at the corners. One shows the path of the moon across 12 months, not in drawings but in lines of numbers. Each row is a month, each symbol a shift. It's mesmerizing in a very sleepy, very methodical way. Imagine Excel spreadsheets, but made of mud and spiritually dangerous if you miscalculate. Fringe enthusiasts have suggested some of these tablets show knowledge of the 18.6-year lunar nodal cycle, the Saros eclipse period, and even hints at predicting planetary retrograde motion. Whether that's true is debated. Historians still argue whether these patterns were mathematical brilliance or lucky guesswork with a touch of divine fear. You ask what happens when a tablet cracks or is lost. The scribe sighs and gestures to a boy in the corner who's holding a damp lump of clay and blinking like he hasn't seen sunlight since last festival season. "We recopy," the scribe says. "Always recopy. There's no printing press, no digital backup. If someone sneezes while carrying a century's worth of eclipse data, that's it, goodbye omens." So Babylon developed backup habits bordering on obsession. Multiple copies, triple versions stored in temple vaults. When they say, "Don't anger the gods," this is what they mean: don't drop the data. A priest enters and hands the scribe a tablet with fresh observations from the ziggurat. "Mars rose a hand early," he mutters. The scribe raises an eyebrow. Again, he scrawls it in shorthand. To you, it looks like chicken tracks pressed into wet soap. But to him, it's a complete thought. The planet of war arriving before its scheduled appearance. Bad timing, maybe bad politics. You ask if they use these tablets like calendars. He nods slowly. "We look at last year, and the year before. If Jupiter moved early then and famine followed, we note it. If nothing happened, we still note it. We watch." He pauses. The stars repeat, but not always the same. A fringe theory you remember says some scribes may have encoded secret meanings, political messages disguised as star reports. That Venus rising early might mean rebellion brewing, rather than rain delayed. There's no hard proof, of course, but it's Babylon. You never rule out politics and poetry sharing a clay tablet. In the far corner, another apprentice carefully stacks tablets in rows according to deity. Marduk, Ishtar, Nabu. Each god gets their own stellar territory. Mars is sacred to Nergal, god of plague and slightly bad moods. The moon? Sin. Yes, that's the god's name. Sin. He's more reliable than his title suggests. As you lean back against a cool mud brick wall, the scratch-scratch of styluses fills the chamber like sleepy crickets. Someone lights a small oil lamp. The flame flickers in rhythm with the breeze, casting wobbly constellations on the ceiling. Feels oddly timeless. Like you're not just visiting ancient Babylon, you're stuck in it. But not in a bad way. More like one of those dreams you don't want to end. The scribe looks up for the first time. "The stars move without clocks," he says. "But not without stories." And that's the Babylonian secret in a clay nutshell. The room smells different now. You've moved to a smaller chamber off the main scriptorium, less ink, more incense. A brazier smolders gently in the corner, perfuming the air with frankincense and something sharp, like crushed myrrh and temple politics. Here, the tone is more serious. There's a tablet on a low table, half wrapped in linen and treated like it's sacred. Probably because it is. You're looking at a star chart focused on one celestial diva in particular, Venus. Venus is a big deal here, not just as a planet, but as the planet. Known as Dilbat, it's the gleaming jewel of the morning and evening sky, and Babylonian priests are obsessed with it. You think you're passionate about coffee? These guys tracked Venus's movements for over 21 years, through every phase, every disappearance, every awkward glow-up and retreat. That tablet you're gazing at? It's part of what modern scholars call the Venus Tablet of Ammisaduqa. Sounds official, feels old, and it is dating back to roughly 1600 BCE. The thing reads like the world's most committed celestial diary. In the month of Nisanu, Venus disappeared in the west on the 15th day, remained absent for 3 days, and rose in the east on the 18th day. You blink. That's specific. Weirdly specific. You glance out the narrow window. Venus is just visible now, low on the horizon, sharp as a silver pin. The priests cared deeply about where and when Venus appeared or vanished. Not just for poetic reasons, this was linked to omens, kingship, and agricultural timing. If Venus stayed hidden longer than expected, it might mean rebellion, or a king's hair falling out prematurely. Same thing, really. Mainstream historians agree that the Venus tablet was one of the earliest long-term observational records in history. It suggests Babylonians didn't just watch the stars casually. They studied them systematically, waiting for patterns that could take years to emerge. Imagine watching a planet vanish behind sunlight and still being interested 263 days later when it pops back up. That's dedication. Or maybe celestial FOMO. But here's the rub. Historians still argue whether the Venus tablet is based on actual observation or some kind of predictive calendar trick. Some believe the data reflects genuine nightly records kept over decades. Others suspect it's a reverse-engineered list, designed to look accurate but fudged slightly to match political expectations. Because, surprise, when you tie astronomy to royal legitimacy, people get very creative with the numbers. There's a fringe theory that Venus's behavior was used to legitimize or delegitimize kings. If the planet rose on the wrong side of the horizon, it could mean the gods were annoyed. Naturally, a few clever priests might have adjusted some timing to help the right ruler stay on the throne. Venus rose in the east? Perfect. Long live the king. And if it didn't, well, maybe you just delay the report until Venus does something more flattering. Still, the Venus records are breathtaking in their scope. You crouch beside a priest as he gently presses a new entry into soft clay. Dilbat vanished late, he says, almost like a prayer. 9th day instead of the 7th. He doesn't explain what that means. He doesn't have to. Somewhere, a court astrologer is probably already drafting a politely panicked letter to the palace. You ask how they keep track of Venus's cycle without any mechanical timekeeping. He holds up a polished stone disc, its surface scratched with faint radial lines like slices on a pie. It's a tool, he says, to help chart the planet's position over the lunar months. Crude, but effective. The Babylonians understood that Venus has an odd rhythm. It disappears behind the sun for about 8 days, reappears in the opposite sky, and eventually repeats this dance every 584 days. You think your calendar is hard to manage? Try syncing royal decisions to a celestial ballerina who's always fashionably late. Sometimes, Venus would rise just before dawn, other times just after sunset, and occasionally not at all for months. That gap drove priests nuts. Imagine telling the king, "Yeah, your ruling star ghosted us again. Should we panic or just plant fewer lentils this year?" A young apprentice taps your shoulder and leads you to the roof. There, he hands you a waxed clay slate etched with past Venus risings. You trace your finger over it. Each notch a time Venus did something inconvenient. Here, he points, Dilbat rose too early. It rained frogs. You give him a look. He grins. Or maybe it just rained. Hard to say. Memory's fuzzy. Historians still debate whether the Babylonian priesthood believed in the omens or simply used them to steer public sentiment. Did they see the sky as fate or just a persuasive tool? Your guess is as good as theirs. One thing is certain. Venus was the queen of the sky. She represented Ishtar, the goddess of love, war, and the occasional fiery tantrum. When Venus was bright, people cheered. When she vanished, things got tense. You can almost feel the pressure hanging in the air every time the planet dips below the horizon, like a celestial pause in a very dramatic soap opera. As you stare at that bright point on the edge of the night, you begin to get it. This isn't just tracking. It's a conversation. A very slow, very sparkly conversation between humans and the divine. And it's still going. You're sitting under a makeshift canopy now, half shade, half dust filter, watching a group of skywatchers whose lives revolve not around the sun or Venus, but the moon. They're called lunar scribes, and they are the quiet specialists of the Babylonian cosmos. No flair, no grand declarations, just the slow, deliberate rhythm of the moon's changing face. One of them greets you with a nod and a chipped ceramic bowl of goat's milk. You sip it politely. It tastes like regret and chalk, and take your seat beside a wide slate covered in crescent sketches and soft clay markers. The night is thick and unusually silent. Perfect moon-watching evening. The moon matters here, maybe more than any other body in the sky. Not because it's dramatic, though it can be when it decides to turn red and spook everyone, but because it's predictable. Kind of. Mostly. When it behaves. The scribes are preparing to record the first visibility of the new moon. A big deal. It's how they anchor their lunar calendar. Forget flipping a page. Time here begins when a sliver of silver shows up just after sunset, low and shy on the western horizon. Miss it and the whole schedule wobbles. Temples might fast on the wrong day. Markets could crash, well, at least in the goat trading sense. Tonight's visibility is iffy. There's cloud cover. One priest sighs and scratches the back of his neck, clearly used to this brand of cosmic anxiety. If we don't see it, he murmurs. We wait. And we argue. Classic Babylonian problem-solving. Mainstream historians widely acknowledge the importance of lunar tracking in Babylonian culture. Not only were months pegged to the moon cycle, but major festivals, tax days, and coronation anniversaries were all scheduled by it. A misplaced moon could mess up the entire empire's vibe. What's less clear, historians still argue whether the Babylonians ever had a truly fixed lunar calendar. Some think they adjusted it month by month based on visibility. Others suspect there was a backup system of mathematical predictions. Either way, arguments were common. You imagine a scribe nervously suggesting, "Maybe it rose and we just didn't see it?" While a priest narrows his eyes like, "Nice try." You notice that alongside the observation tools, string, sticks, basic gnomons, there's also a stack of dusty clay tablets inscribed with eclipse omens. These are particularly juicy. Solar eclipse in month 4? Bad news for the western provinces. Lunar eclipse during a king's birthday month? Someone's getting mysteriously reassigned to the goat census. One particularly dramatic entry reads, "If the moon is covered on the night of the third watch, and Mars is visible, the king will not finish the season in health." That's ominous. You glance around to make sure there's no Mars tonight, just in case. But even among the gloom and doom, there's a weird kind of optimism. The scribes don't seem panicked, just very alert. One older priest, his beard braided with tiny bronze beads, leans back against the wall and muses. The moon hides, but always returns, just like wisdom or overdue taxes. A younger apprentice chuckles and then stiffens. "There," he whispers, pointing west. You follow his gaze, and there it is, the faintest sliver, a delicate arc glowing above the horizon like a scratched mirror in the sky. The group murmurs, presses styluses into clay. The date is locked. The new month begins. Somewhere, someone will now sacrifice a goat. Possibly 2. You're not sure of the going rate. There's a story passed down among these moon watchers. Possibly invented, possibly true. A scribe once swore that a full moon appeared blue during a hot summer in the reign of King Nabonidus. He recorded it faithfully. The omen was never interpreted. Some say it meant nothing. Others say it was the start of Babylon's decline. You can't help but appreciate the poetic timing. Fringe researchers have suggested that the Babylonians may have recognized something like the Saros cycle, a roughly 18-year pattern in eclipses. While there's no firm consensus, some clay tablets hint at long-term tracking of lunar behavior far beyond what was necessary for mere omens. If true, that would put Babylonian astronomy even closer to modern scientific practice than previously believed. Still, it's the smaller things that make lunar tracking feel so human. You watch as a scribe traces the moon's arc on a wax slate, muttering calculations based not on degrees but on finger widths and temple rooflines. A child's voice shouts from a nearby courtyard, "The moon looks like my sister's toenail." Everyone laughs, then immediately quiets, as if the moon might hear and take offense. The scribe beside you leans in and says quietly, "People think we study the sky, but we really study waiting." And he's right. Watching the moon isn't about speed. It's about showing up, night after night, even when the clouds are thick and the omens are grumpy. It's about knowing that time doesn't have to tick. It can glow, if you're patient enough to see it. You close your eyes for a moment. The air is still. The moon is there, barely, beautifully, and so are you. You're standing in the sun now. No clouds, no stars, just the raw heat of a Babylonian afternoon pressing against your shoulders like a heavy wool curtain. The city bustles at midday. Vendors shout over piles of dates and cucumbers. Oxen shuffle past with the calm indifference of beasts who've seen too many summers. And amid it all, a single priest stares at a stick in the ground. You blink. No, really a stick. It's upright, planted in a smooth square of sand, casting a sharp little shadow across carefully marked lines. The priest squints at it, makes a note on a tablet, and mutters something that sounds vaguely threatening to the sun. Welcome to Babylon's daytime timekeeping. You've entered the humble realm of the shadow clock. No gears, no bells, no polished bronze, just light, shadow, and a whole lot of memorization. This device, sometimes called a gnomon, is one of the simplest tools in Babylon's astronomical arsenal. But simple doesn't mean shallow. Here's the trick. As the sun rises and sets, the stick's shadow changes length and direction. Track that consistently enough and you get a rough sense of the hour. Kind of Probably, unless it's cloudy, or you knocked the stick a little while sweeping. A nearby apprentice hands you a thin reed and says, "Try it." You hold it upright, letting the sun cast a thin, sharp line across the sand. He grins. "You're just in time for, maybe late morning?" You raise an eyebrow. "We don't name hours. We feel them," he adds smugly. Mainstream historians acknowledge the Babylonians used rudimentary sundials, especially during the Neo-Babylonian period. These weren't portable clocks or detailed timekeepers, but functional tools tied to temple life, farming cycles, and most importantly, rituals. If the shadow reached the third line by midday, that meant it was time to begin the offering. If it didn't, you waited, or started without the gods. Your call. You follow the priest to another courtyard where a large basin of water reflects the sky like a cracked mirror. He gestures to it, then tosses a pebble in. "Some say you can read time by the ripples," he says. You lean over, intrigued. "Those people are usually wrong," he adds, deadpan. Still, water was part of the Babylonian timekeeping toolkit. Some researchers argue that they used rudimentary clepsydras, or water clocks, vessels with tiny holes that dripped at a predictable rate. Not exactly Rolex precision, but close enough to tell when it was time to light the incense. There's a fringe theory that these water clocks weren't just used to track hours, but to measure ritual purity. If a priest needed to be in a sacred state for exactly 27 minutes and 12 drips, the water clock made sure he didn't cut corners. Whether that's true or just the ancient equivalent of a workplace timecard system, historians still argue about it. You ask what happens if the sun doesn't show up, if it's cloudy or dusty. The apprentice shrugs. Then the gods sleep late, and so do we. Babylonian logic, poetic and practical. Nearby, a group of scribes are practicing shadow estimation. Sounds fancy, but really they're just pacing out how long the stick's shadow stretches during key parts of the day. If the shadow is 3 cubits by the first rooster cry, one mutters, "Then the moon will be jealous, and your neighbor will owe you barley." He grins. He's joking. Maybe. This fusion of observation and interpretation is very Babylonian. Time isn't chopped into sterile intervals. It's wrapped in narrative, in ritual, in good old-fashioned gossip. They're not just marking when the sun crosses a line. They're wondering why, and what it means for the man whose ox cart squeaked during the priest's chant last night. And yet, the accuracy is there. Babylon's temple architects oriented buildings based on solar angles. City planners used the sun's path to organize the streets for better light and airflow. Merchants opened shop only when the market square's western wall was half in shadow. No clocks, just light. One older priest, leaning on a polished staff and chewing on a date pit, chuckles as he watches you squint at the sundial. "Time is lazy," he says. "It arrives when it wants, leaves when it's bored. You can measure it, but you can't chase it." You glance again at the shadow. It's moved, just slightly, now resting over a new marker scratched into the dust. A bell chimes in the distance, not a mechanical one, but a temple gong struck by hand. The priest stands and dusts off his robe. "Prayer," he says. "The sun says it's time." Even here, under the harsh light of day, Babylon finds time not by watching hands tick, but by watching light shift, shadows stretch, water drip. Everything is slow, natural, a little unpredictable, like your uncle's cooking schedule, vague, but consistent enough to trust. As you walk back into the shaded colonnade, you pass a mural depicting the sun god Shamash rising in glory. He's not holding a clock, he's holding scales, because here time isn't precision, it's balance. The air grows cooler as the sun dips toward the horizon, casting the ziggurat in long, sleepy shadows. You're resting beneath a stone arch where someone's hung garlands of dried dates and pressed flowers. An offering to Ishtar, maybe, or just a scribe with a flair for home decor. You've made it to an odd little courtyard nestled beside the temple's astronomy wing. It's lined with low benches, a cracked bird bath, and a wall relief that shows a scorpion, a goat, and a crab playing what appears to be a very intense board game. Welcome to the world of Babylon's not-quite zodiac. Now, you've probably heard that the zodiac, with its 12 signs and vague promises about your love life, came from the Babylonians. And yes, sort of. But the truth? It's messier than a moonless goat festival. You sit with a trio of astronomer priests lounging in the evening breeze. They offer you dates and figs, and one of them gestures toward a worn clay tablet lying in his lap. It's covered in rows of symbols, some familiar, some definitely not. He points to a cluster. "This is the true shepherd of Anu," he says, tapping what looks like a bent fish. "And over here, the great swallow." He pauses. "Not Leo or Aries yet." See, the Babylonians had constellations, lots of them, but the 12-sign zodiac as we know it wasn't standardized until much later. Originally, they used as many as 17 or 18 constellations along the ecliptic. Some faded into obscurity. Others evolved into the signs we recognize today. Mainstream scholars generally agree that the Babylonian star catalog, known as mul.appin, was the precursor to the modern zodiac, but it didn't start with neat divisions or catchy sign names. It was more like an extensive guest list for a very exclusive celestial party. "Come in, Scorpion. Not you, extra goatfish, we're full." You trace the edge of a stone carving showing what might be Cancer, but it's missing claws. In Babylon, the crab wasn't always crabby. And Gemini? Once called the Great Twins. But those twins didn't always behave. According to a fringe theory, one of the twins was occasionally swapped for a lion cub or a bird, depending on who was doing the carving. Historians still argue whether this reflects evolving mythology or just a long-standing Babylonian tradition of artistic improvisation. Another priest shows you a sky chart scratched into a wax tablet. It divides the heavens into 3 main zones, each associated with a major god: Enlil, Anu, and Ea. These paths of the gods helped organize celestial movements, but they're not quite the zodiac as we know it. The 12 signs emerge slowly over centuries, like guests who arrive late but end up dominating the party conversation. The priest smiles as he notices your confusion. "You moderns have 12. We had more, then fewer, then 12 again." He shrugs. Stars don't care about symmetry, but something did start to change around the 5th century BCE. A shift from poetic constellations to mathematical precision. Babylonian astronomers began dividing the sky into equal 30-degree sections. 12 of them, each one associated with a familiar group of stars. This was the early zodiac, but even then, not everyone agreed on what went where. One of the younger apprentices shows you a comical drawing of a centaur aiming a bow at a fish. "Sagittarius and Pisces were never friends," he deadpants. You snort and he adds, "Also, the goatfish keeps crashing the party." It's his thing. Despite the humor, these divisions mattered. They were tied to omens, agricultural planning, and even medical diagnoses. A person born under the path of the lion might be thought courageous or dangerously stubborn. A baby born when the scorpion rose at dawn might want to avoid sharp objects, or become a dentist. Interpretations varied. Here's something delightful. Babylonian astrologers didn't use their signs the way your horoscope app does. They didn't care if Mercury was in retrograde for your vibes. They looked at the sky and said, "Mars is in the Bull constellation. The king should avoid war. Also, maybe wear fewer gold bracelets." Still, there's a quiet poetry to how the zodiac developed. It wasn't designed all at once. It emerged, like ink rising through damp parchment. Different schools in different cities had their own favorite constellations. Some priests preferred the old twins. Others insisted on keeping the Great Swallow, even after she flew off the chart. Historians still debate which signs were standardized first, or whether Capricorn was ever meant to be half goat, half fish, or just a misunderstood sea monster with an inferiority complex. The tablets aren't clear. That's part of the charm. You lean back, watching the sky begin its soft blue fade into velvet. The first stars twinkle on, slow, unhurried. The swallow flutters somewhere to the east, or maybe that's just your eyes getting sleepy. The priests continue their quiet bickering over constellation trivia, arguing whether the plow counts as 1 star or 7. Eventually, you close your eyes and let their voices drift into background hum. 12 signs, 17 constellations. Two twin goats with identity issues. Whatever the number, the sky remains what it always was in Babylon. A map, a myth, and a mirror. You're walking through a long colonnade now, half lit by oil lamps set in shallow wall niches. The stone beneath your feet is cool, even soothing, though your toes are starting to regret every sandal-related decision you've made today. You turn a corner and find yourself inside a hall that feels different, quieter, less sacred, less starry, and more political. There's a tension in this room that doesn't quite match the sleepy devotion of moon watchers or the sleepy bickering of zodiac priests. This is the office of the temple's ombudsman of omens, for lack of a better phrase. He's not here to observe stars, he's here to interpret them. And if the sky's being especially dramatic, he's here to make sure the message gets translated tastefully for the king. Sitting at a low wooden desk is a lean, hawk-nosed man with fingers stained black from ink and, you suspect, stress. Before him lie two tablets, one with planetary positions, neatly noted. The other, a fresh slab of clay with ominous blanks just waiting to be filled. His job is not just to report the heavens, but to frame them. This is where Babylonian astronomy meets its shadowy cousin, divination. The priest glances at you and mutters, "Jupiter lingered in the bull again." He doesn't sound thrilled. The omens disagree about what it means. Crop surplus? Or the king loses a cousin? You sit quietly, watching as he debates the finer points of lingering, a term that apparently covers both celestial hesitation and royal back pain. He jots down a line of cuneiform and sighs. Science would be easier if the gods left footnotes. Here's the thing, Babylonian astronomy was incredibly precise. Their observations were systematic, detailed, and data-rich. They could track Venus for decades and predict eclipses with eerie accuracy. But, and this is key, they didn't separate astronomy from astrology. There was no line between watching the stars and wondering what they were trying to say about your neighbor's haircut. Mainstream scholars are divided. Some argue that Babylonian skywatchers were proto-scientists trapped in a mystical framework. Others say they were full-on priests using science to back up their magic. Historians still argue whether these temple offices represented two camps, diviners versus observers, or whether it was just one big celestial party with different costumes. A junior assistant enters with yet another tablet, this one reporting a curious flicker in Saturn's brightness. Could be cloud haze, he suggests. The priest grimaces. Could be a plague omen. You get the feeling he says that a lot. You wander over to a different table, where a few tablets are organized into neat categories. You read, if Mars rises pale and fast, the king's enemy will rise in the west. If Venus sets while the moon is dark, the river will overflow and fish will bite without salt. If Jupiter is seen with no moon for 3 nights, the gods are planning something, and it probably involves goats. Okay, that last one might have been misread. Still, these are actual, real entries. Babylonian omen lists were dense. Hundreds, even thousands of permutations and predictions. And yes, sometimes they contradicted each other. But the trick was in the interpretation. An experienced diviner knew how to smooth out the weird bits, how to massage the data into a politically safe bedtime story. You glance at one fringe theory tablet, an unusual chart suggesting that omens weren't just predictive, but prescriptive. That is, they didn't just reveal fate, they shaped it. If the heavens looked grumpy, you acted grumpy. Maybe you declared a fast. Maybe you canceled a coronation. The sky said jump, and the priest said, we're already mid-air. One apprentice tells you about the substitute king ritual. It's exactly what it sounds like. If the stars warned of danger to the real king, a stand-in was appointed. A poor soul given royal robes, a crown, and one grim job. Be king for a few ominous days while the actual king hid under a metaphorical, and possibly literal, blanket. Afterward, well, let's just say the temp position had a very strict contract. You suddenly understand why nobody wanted to be the king's cousin during eclipse season. Still, it's not all gloom. Sometimes a lucky alignment meant prosperity. A clear Venus rising could justify tax relief. A well-behaved Saturn might signal a peaceful spring. The job of the priest diviner was to spin a cosmic yarn that kept everyone calm, or at least compliant. You ask if the priest ever just tells the king the truth. He smiles faintly. The truth is whatever keeps barley prices stable. That might be the most Babylonian thing you've heard all day. The oil lamps flicker. Outside, the sky is returning to black velvet. You step out of the chamber, ears ringing with omen fragments and your own quiet unease. The stars look the same as they did an hour ago. But now you see them differently. Less like distant points of light and more like messengers. Very chatty, very moody messengers. Back in the temple hallway, you pass two scholars debating whether the moon's reddish glow last night meant royal unrest or just desert dust. You wonder aloud, couldn't it be both? They pause. One of them smiles. Now that's the right kind of thinking. You're somewhere quiet now, well, quieter. The sounds of the bustling city have faded into a kind of sandy hush, broken only by the soft flutter of linen curtains and the low murmur of voices echoing off polished stone. You're in the private library of a palace astrologer, which, in Babylon, is less of a horoscope enthusiast and more of a celestial risk analyst for the royal family. This is where the stars get personal. The astrologer greets you with a distracted nod, barely looking up from a tablet inscribed with complex star patterns and what you can only assume is either someone's birth chart or a very elaborate recipe for pigeon stew. He beckons you inside with an ink-stained finger. "Quiet," he mutters. Jupiter's near the lion and the prince just caught a fever. You tread softly past low wooden shelves filled with tablet boxes, each labeled in elegant cuneiform with names, titles, and dates. You realize after a moment what you're looking at: an archive of royal horoscopes. Generations of Babylonian rulers, catalogued not by conquest or decree, but by the sky. He hands you one at random. "Belshazzar," he says, "born during a full moon and a late Mars. Very ambitious. Very unlucky." The tablet feels heavier than it should, and not just because it's made of baked clay. This is the cosmic resume of a prince. The positions of the planets at his birth were seen as divine indicators, not of destiny exactly, but of temperament. The sky might suggest a ruler's leanings toward wisdom or wrath, loyalty or a fondness for tiger-laced wine feasts. Or both. Mainstream scholars confirm that Babylonian astrologers created some of the earliest known natal horoscopes, complete with birth date, time, roughly, and observed planetary positions. This practice wasn't everyday fare. It was reserved for the elite. If you were a farmer, you got omens. If you were royalty, you got analysis. And not just once. Kings had celestial checkups. Every few years, priests would review a ruler's birth chart in light of new planetary movements. "Oh, your majesty, Saturn's back in your 11th house. Best delay that goat census until next month." The astrologer motions to a tablet covered in tight, neat lines. "This one," he says, "was made for a queen." You raise your eyebrows. Queens usually didn't get top billing in Babylonian records. But apparently this one insisted. "She had Mercury in the ram," he adds. "Very persuasive. You imagine her sweet-talking a priest into rewriting an unfavorable omen. Mars? Retrograde? Surely not my Mars." Still, the astrologer takes his work seriously. He shows you how he calculates conjunctions using a mix of observation and older records. He uses wax slates, strings, knotted reeds, and yes, a bowl of sand. You ask how accurate these forecasts really were. He shrugs. "We're not predicting weather. We're watching leanings. It's a Babylonian truth. They rarely claimed the stars determined anything. The heavens suggested, warned, nudged. But people were still people, capable of defying omens with mixed results." Fringe scholars have pointed out that many of these horoscopes contain vague or contradictory statements. Things like, "The moon is strong, but so is Mars." It's the ancient equivalent of "you may face challenges, but also opportunities," which frankly sounds like every horoscope ever written. Still, there's something compelling about the way Babylonian rulers turned to the stars not for certainty, but for perspective. The astrologer explains that the king might study his chart before a battle or a treaty, not to decide but to hesitate, To pause, consider, weigh the stars like a second opinion from a divine advisor. There's one tablet in the collection marked simply unnamed. You ask about it. The astrologer's voice lowers. A child born during a blood moon, with Venus absent and Jupiter eclipsed. You feel a shiver. The omens were unkind. You glance at the empty space where a name might have been inscribed. They never gave him one, he adds softly. You sit with that for a while. It's easy to laugh at old omens from the safety of history, but in a world where the stars were your only compass, some births weren't celebrated. They were endured. The astrologer offers you a stylus and a blank slate. Your turn, he says with the faintest smile. Where were the stars when you were born? You laugh and admit you have no idea. He shrugs. Then we'll guess. He begins scribbling. Let's say Mars was in the goatfish and the moon was new. That makes you persistent, curious, likely to wander into ancient libraries. You ask what that means. Means you'll live long enough to hear many stories. He taps the slate. And probably annoy a priest. The lamps glow low as you lean back against a cushion. The room hums with quiet energy, of planets scribbled into clay, of destinies written in starlight. The astrologer stretches, yawns, and adds, "The stars don't rule us, but they do notice when we show up late. You're ankle deep in dirt now, not metaphorically, literally. You're standing in a field just outside the city walls, where rows of barley sway under the lazy breeze. A pair of goats give you the side eye, and a farmer with a sun-worn face gestures to the sky like it owes him money. This is where astronomy meets agriculture. Not in elegant temples or dusty libraries, but in the dust itself. And it turns out the stars have a lot to say about crops, especially when they're misbehaving. The farmer squints at the horizon and mutters, "The Pleiades rose crooked this year." You ask what that means. He doesn't elaborate, just frowns and starts poking a furrowed line in the soil. You get the sense that crooked stars are never good news for barley. In Babylon, farmers were surprisingly sky literate. They didn't need to know all the planetary names or which god preferred which constellation, but they did know that when certain stars showed up at certain times, things either went very well or very, very wrong. Mainstream scholars agree that celestial timing was critical to Babylonian agriculture. The heliacal rising of particular stars, when they appeared just before dawn after a period of invisibility, often marked planting or harvesting windows. For example, when the star cluster we now call the Pleiades, they called it MUL.MUL, rose in the east just before sunrise, it signaled the arrival of a new season. Time to sow, or sometimes time to worry. And yes, there were omens, many, in fact. A clay tablet fragment found in Sippar reads something like, "If the moon is low and red during planting, locusts will eat the barley." Another one warns, "If Sirius flickers blue, water will not rise." That's poetic, terrifyingly poetic, especially if you're depending on that water to not die. Fringe scholars point out that these star-based predictions may have evolved from centuries of practical observation. Perhaps early farmers noticed a consistent pattern. Whenever Mars burns red during the spring moon, our onions go soft. It might have started as folklore, but over generations it became data written, cataloged, whispered to apprentices alongside how to spot mold on lentils. You crouch beside a group of field workers sorting dried reeds. One of them explains that their planting calendar comes straight from the temple, delivered via runners who carry omen tablets sealed with wax and a lot of anxious energy. "The moon was late this month," she says, shrugging. "We wait. The gods might be resting." The patience here is impressive. You ask what happens if the crops fail anyway. A boy nearby answers without hesitation. The stars were ignored. Not wrong soil, not late rain. The stars were ignored. In Babylon, accountability starts in the sky. One tablet you're shown offers a peculiar forecast. If the moon is hidden and wind blows from the north, fish will breed in the canals, but barley will sour. You try to picture that happening and immediately get distracted by the idea of sour barley. The farmer just shrugs again. It's happened before. You decide not to ask follow-ups. Despite the cosmic warnings, Babylonian farmers weren't helpless. They built clever irrigation systems, understood seasonal shifts, and developed grain storage techniques that rival some modern solutions. But when nature turned rude, they looked upward, not for miracles, but for explanations. One priest astronomer, visiting from the city, joins you in the field and explains how he uses lunar calendars and stellar risings to predict when to warn farmers about flooding. If Jupiter lags behind Venus, he says, we may see salt in the river. You ask if that's always true. He smiles. No, but when it is, people remember. Historians still argue whether these agricultural star omens were based more on observation or just convenient ways to blame failure on something unstoppable. After all, you can't yell at the stars. Well, you can, but the stars don't care. At the edge of the field, an elder draws star shapes into the dust with a stick, explaining to a circle of children how to spot the lion constellation, which they call Gur. When his paw touches the western hill, he says, the rivers will grow hungry. The kids nod solemnly, as if that makes perfect sense. You try not to laugh, then realize he's not joking. The sun begins to sink low, painting the field gold. The Pleiades reappear faintly, just a whisper above the eastern haze. The farmer points. There, he says, crooked again. You still don't know what that means, but it feels important. As you walk back toward the city, you pass a cracked tablet half buried in the soil. The inscription is half erased, but you make out a fragment. If the moon sleeps through the equinox, the lentils will turn on us. You don't know whether to chuckle or take it very, very seriously. Probably both. You've entered what can only be described as the most frustratingly chill room in all of Babylon. There are no tablets here, no priests, no chanting. Just a single man sitting under a woven reed canopy with a bowl of figs and a stick. That's it. A stick. You're starting to suspect Babylon ran mostly on various lengths of wood and an admirable tolerance for ambiguity. This man, it turns out, is an expert in not measuring things directly. He's what later generations might call an intuitive astronomer. His specialty, tracking time without clocks or numbers. You sit beside him, and he greets you with a lazy nod and the phrase, the sky is enough if you know what to ignore. Excellent. He gestures to the sky with the practiced hand of someone who has pointed at stars so often they now respond emotionally. Do you see that smudge near the scorpion? He asks. You squint. That's how I know when the river will rise. Not because of its brightness, but because it twitches. You nod, slowly. Welcome to Babylonian pattern logic. While the city scholars recorded planetary positions to the cubit and fraction, rural observers, especially those in outlying temple districts, often worked without exact numbers. They relied on visual rhythm, patterns of movement, brightness, location relative to land features, and memory. Babylon was full of these informal astronomers. Shepherds, boatmen, date farmers. People who could look at the way the moon leaned against a mountain and tell you how long until your ox gave birth. Mainstream historians have long struggled to define this aspect of Babylonian timekeeping. It's not astronomy in the strict sense. There are no degrees, no units, but it worked. These observers knew, often to within a few days, when seasonal events would arrive. They didn't need clocks. They had experience, and sometimes figs. One of the man's tools is a curved stick with knots tied at irregular intervals. Each knot matches a star's rise time from here, he says. I sit here. I hold it just so. I wait. You ask how he remembers which knot is which. I don't, he replies. My bones do. Honestly, respect. A fringe theory among modern researchers suggests these kinds of intuitive observations formed the original basis for Babylon's eventual numerical records. That is, someone watched for generations, passed on what they saw, and eventually someone else started writing it down and calling it math. Whether or not that's true, it's clear these non-numerical methods carried weight. The temples respected them, sometimes even consulted them. You point to a spot where the sky is just beginning to soften toward dusk. The man nods. When that star touches the roof of the fish dryer's shed, the air changes. You don't even see a star yet. But 5 minutes later, sure enough, there it is, glimmering exactly where he said. He doesn't flinch. Just chews a fig. There's a rhythmic poetry to how he observes the world. Not Saturn at 21 degrees, but the second dark night after the moon returns. Not for hours after sunset, but when the owl's cry matches the frogs. It's observational storytelling, and it works because it's been passed down like lullabies. Historians still argue whether these methods were seen as equal to temple astrology or just tolerated rustic wisdom. Some inscriptions praise those who see without math. Others call them wind listeners, which sounds flattering until you realize it probably meant makes things up. Still, this guy, he knows his sky. You ask him how he tracks the passing of days. He holds up a string of pebbles, each with a tiny notch or scratch. I add one when the breeze from the river smells of new clay. You smile. You want to believe that's nonsense. But as the air shifts, you catch the scent. Earthy, warm, damp. Rivers rising soon. And this man, who hasn't touched a number all day, knew it before you even smelled it. You sit for a while in companionable silence. The stars blink on slowly. Familiar now. Some of them anyway. The scorpion. The swallow. That angry goatfish. You try to match your memory to what you see, but the patterns feel looser now, more fluid. You ask one last question. What happens when you forget a pattern? He shrugs. The sky remembers. There's something profoundly comforting in that. As you leave, the man presses a fig into your hand. It's not an omen. It's just a figure, or maybe both. In Babylon, things have a way of being exactly what they seem, and something else entirely. You're indoors again, but barely. The roof above your head is more suggestion than shelter. Woven reeds, a few planks, and a stubborn lizard watching you like it's guarding sacred archives. This isn't a temple or a scholar's chamber. It's a record room, a real one, the kind no one gives tours of, a kind of ancient office space where data goes to sleep and sometimes wake up centuries later. Welcome to Babylon's cosmic bureaucracy. There's a distinct smell in the air, baked clay, lamp oil, and the faint scent of sandalwood ink. A pair of scribes sit on low stools, hunched like owls over what must be hundreds of clay tablets. Neatly stacked, though not alphabetized. That would be too modern. One scribe waves you in with the enthusiasm of someone who hasn't spoken to anyone outside his profession in 3 lunar cycles. Venus log, he says proudly, gesturing to a wall of shelves. 57 years. He pauses. Well, mostly. This is where the long-view magic happened. These weren't the folks doing the initial stargazing or omen dreaming. These were the ones cataloging it all. Quietly, methodically, sleepily, with great reverence and increasingly cramped handwriting. You glance over a tablet labeled Year 11, month of Tammuz. It records things like, Jupiter remained in its house. The moon was full. The street dogs barked twice. Venus was absent for 7 days. The fishmonger's wife had twins. Okay, that last one may or may not be relevant, but they wrote it down anyway. Mainstream scholars agree that Babylon's strength in astronomy came not just from keen observation, but from persistence. These scribes kept records for decades, sometimes generations. They created what may be the world's first longitudinal study. If a pattern repeated every 17 years, someone would notice, and then spend 8 years convincing the temple it wasn't coincidence. You pick up a thin tablet worn nearly smooth at the edges. It's been recopied at least twice, each line fainter than the last. That one, says the scribe, traveled from Uruk. 20 years ago, we made 3 backups. He pauses, then adds with deep pride, all survived. There's something tender in the way they treat their archive. Not like a vault of dead facts, but a sleeping creature that needs feeding and patience. You find one scribe carefully moistening a cracked tablet with a cloth, as if reviving a fainting oracle. Here's a curious bit. Some scholars suggest these records weren't meant for the present at all. That is, a priest might track a planet's strange zigzag not to understand it today, but to leave a breadcrumb trail for some future observer. We didn't know what it meant, he might say, but we saw it, and you will too. Fringe theories go even further. One argues that Babylonian cosmic records were part of an attempt to map divine cycles that would only fully unfold over centuries, like a celestial chess game where each generation only gets to move one piece. You notice one tablet marked, Omen patterns. Inconclusive. That's unusually honest. The entry reads, if the stars flicker on the 8th night and no eclipse follows, record again next year. You admire the dedication. Most of us lose interest if a movie doesn't explain itself in the first 10 minutes. One apprentice tells you his current task is sorting eclipse logs. One per season, he explains. Unless there's a double moon shadow, then we consult the backup drawer. He points to what appears to be a large basket filled with fragments. It looks suspiciously like someone's been sitting on it. You ask how long it takes to update a full star record. 70 years, he replies without blinking. Longer if Saturn refuses to cooperate. That's not a joke. Babylonian astronomy relied on celestial cycles that took decades to repeat. Some scribes would die before their data came full circle. And yet they wrote, they copied, they whispered patterns to the next tired, ink-stained generation. Historians still debate how much of this was scientific method versus holy ritual. But either way, the results were stunning. The Babylonian ability to predict eclipses, down to the season and even the month, was based on this mountain of sleepy, painstaking documentation. You peek into a side alcove and find a pile of mistake tablets, misaligned symbols, smudged names, reversed omens. One even reads, Venus was seen twice. This is wrong. Apologies to the gods. You appreciate the humility. The scribes here don't speak in omens or portents. They speak in patterns, repetitions, dips and arcs and absences. They speak like people who know that time doesn't always shout. It murmurs, and you have to be very, very patient to hear it clearly. The head scribe, an elderly woman with hands like dried leather and eyes like polished stones, gently places a new tablet on the shelf. This one's for them, she says, for the ones who will read it after I'm gone. You nod softly, because here in the quiet hum of clay and ink, Babylon isn't a ruin or a history lesson. It's a conversation, ongoing, dusty, and very, very thorough. The sky is acting weird tonight. It's not just you, everyone's noticed. There's a hush in the temple courtyard where the priests usually gossip about sandals and goat prices. People are looking up, squinting, muttering. A few have even stopped mid-offering, which in Babylon is a big deal. Mars is doing something it shouldn't. It's just hanging there, brighter than usual, slightly off course. Some say it moved backward, though no one saw it move. It was just in a different place this morning than it should have been. Retrograde. You know the word. But the Babylonians didn't. Not in the way we do. For them, Mars wasn't just a dot. It was a being. One who just changed direction without telling anyone. A priest, his beard bristling with irritation, waves you over to a sighting platform. Look, he says, stabbing a bronze stylus at the sky like it personally betrayed him. It was here. Now it's there. That's not allowed. You glance up. Mars, Nergal to the Babylonians, gleams like a bloodied spearhead just above the Lion constellation. That's not its usual haunt. Not this time of year. No one's sure if it's early, late, or angry. Here's the thing. The Babylonians knew about planetary irregularities. They didn't understand them in terms of elliptical orbits or gravitational pull, but they'd observed them enough to expect the unexpected. Mars in particular had a reputation for being troublesome, lingering too long in one part of the sky, fading when it shouldn't, or worse, looping. Mainstream historians agree that Babylonian astronomers recorded what we now call retrograde motion, especially of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. They even diagrammed it using zigzagging arcs on clay tablets, as if the planets were pacing nervously across the heavens. But what it meant, that was up for grabs. Tonight, interpretations are flying faster than shooting stars. One apprentice claims this is a sign of royal betrayal. Another insists it simply means summer will arrive early and with bad melons. A third quietly suggests it's nothing at all, just a quirk of the gods' itinerary. That one gets looks. You hear someone quote a particularly ominous line from an omen tablet. If the red star shifts its path in the month of Abu, a noble house shall fall, and the river shall speak lies. You don't know what that last part means, but you're suddenly very suspicious of the river. Fringe theories, ancient and modern, abound. Some tablets link Mars' misbehavior to diseases of the eye, poor harvests, and even border skirmishes. One famously indecisive tablet reads, "If the red one lingers westward, perhaps a storm, perhaps a feast. Thanks for the clarity, ancient sky journalist." Historians still argue whether these celestial deviations were seen as faults in the heavens or in the observers. Some priests believed the stars never truly misbehaved. It was the readings that were flawed. Others whispered darker things. That a god could go rogue, that Nergal's path was a divine warning rather than a data point. You sit beside a younger scribe drawing Mars' current location onto a wax tablet. He's muttering under his breath, tapping his stylus nervously. "It shouldn't be here," he says. "It's not wrong, but it's not right." You ask what happens if it stays there too long. He pauses. "We prepare a substitute king. You've heard this one before. If the omens turn sour, a temporary ruler takes the throne to absorb the divine fallout. It's like a cosmic lightning rod made of flesh and fancy robes. Mars has inspired a few of those, apparently. You glance back at the sky. Mars hasn't moved. It glows steadily, as if amused by all the chaos below. The priests are still bickering. One is now blaming the moon. Another has stormed off to recalculate star risings from last season, just in case this is all Venus's fault instead. And amid all this uncertainty, you realize something lovely. They're not panicking. They're discussing. Fretting, yes, but also thinking. Testing. Consulting past records. Asking questions they don't have answers for. The head priest eventually sighs, turns to you and says, "The red one has his reasons. That's it. That's the ruling interpretation for now. No decree. No sacrifice. Just wait and watch. Remeasure. Try again tomorrow." It's oddly reassuring. As the night deepens, someone brings wine. Another apprentice pulls out a string chart and tries to match it to Mars' weird path. The group begins retelling other rogue planet stories, like the time Saturn vanished for 3 days and returned with a new star beside it, possibly just a smudge, but they milked it for a full week of omens. One story involves Mars shining so brightly that someone swore they could read by it. The resulting omen? If the red one gives light like a torch, then strangers will dance at the city gates. You don't know if that's romantic or ominous. Probably both. Eventually, the priests settle down. No substitute king. No war drum. Just a revised entry in the log. Mars changed course. Nergal, uncertain. That's the Babylonian way. Stars act strange? Record it. Watch again tomorrow. Don't pretend to know, but don't stop watching. The stars above you look the same, but something's changed. There's a new tension in the Ziggurat library tonight. Not from the heavens, but from Earth. Specifically, from the West. The scribes are whispering names you don't recognize: Thales, Anaximander, Pythagoras. Strangers, foreigners, philosophers from across the sea. The Greeks have started to take an interest in Babylon. You're sitting on a reed mat beside a weary-looking priest who's copying a star chart onto clean clay. He gestures to a diagram beside him, neat little arcs, labeled with symbols. "He said the Earth floats in space." The priest mutters, "Like a cork in water." The Greeks think everything floats. You ask who he is. "A man from Ionia. Wore sandals that didn't match. Welcome to the great knowledge transfer." By the 6th century BCE, Babylon's astronomical expertise had become so renowned that Greek scholars began traveling eastward, eager to learn the secrets of the stars from those who'd been watching them for centuries. Some came humbly, others, well, let's just say not all sandals carried equal humility. Mainstream historians agree. Many foundational elements of Greek astronomy, like the zodiac, the concept of celestial spheres, even the idea of predictable eclipses, were borrowed, adapted, and expanded from Babylonian models. But it wasn't always a friendly exchange. Sometimes it was more like a politely awkward standoff. You wander past two scholars locked in what appears to be a low-volume argument about whether stars are divine lights or just hot rocks. The Babylonian insists that Jupiter has preferences. The Greek insists that it has mass. Neither looks fully satisfied. Still, there's something invigorating in the mix. The Greeks bring geometry, logic, and an obsession with why. The Babylonians bring clay tablets, relentless sky watching, and the phrase, "We've literally tracked Saturn for 80 years. Sit down." One priest shows you a star calendar with annotations in two scripts, cuneiform and early Greek. It's a collaborative record of lunar eclipses, complete with both interpretations. The Greek margin reads, "The Earth's shadow crosses the moon." The Babylonian side says, "The moon hides its face. The king should reflect." Same event, wildly different vibes. Fringe scholars like to imagine a full-on academic culture clash. Greek scholars horrified at the mingling of astronomy with divination, while Babylonian priests roll their eyes at abstract theories with no omens attached. You predicted an eclipse, great, one might say. But did you feel it? Historians still debate how much of Babylonian data was directly absorbed into Greek philosophy versus merely inspiring it. Some suggest that Greek astronomy owes nearly everything to Babylon. Others argue that while the data was borrowed, the frameworks were completely transformed. Either way, this moment, the Babylonian-Greek intersection, is a turning point. You sit beside a young scribe translating a Babylonian star log into Greek. "It's harder than it looks," he says. "Their words for rising and burning sound too similar. I told someone that Mars exploded. I meant it shimmered." You offer him a figure. He accepts with a sigh. There's another layer to all this, the Babylonian sense that the sky wasn't just a system, but a voice. The Greeks wanted rules, equations, circles within circles. The Babylonians? They wanted understanding. They wanted to know what it meant when Venus vanished, not just how many degrees off axis it was. One evening, you watch a Greek student sketch a model of the solar system in the sand, an early idea of orbits, spheres, and nested perfection. A Babylonian priest stands nearby, unimpressed. "Where are the gods in your model?" he asks. The Greek frowns. "We're still looking." And yet, the exchange continues. The Greeks write. The Babylonians copy. Joint star tables begin to appear. Eclipse cycles are refined. Someone suggests a calendar with 365 days. Another argues for leap months. The ziggurat becomes less of a temple and more of an observatory. One tablet you see is labeled Shared Sky. It lists upcoming celestial events, eclipses, risings, conjunctions, with two columns, observation and hypothesis. You smile. For the first time, it feels like people are asking not just what is happening, but how, and sometimes why. But it's not all progress and polite collaboration. You overhear a Greek scholar loudly declaring that the Babylonian zodiac is charmingly inconsistent. Moments later, someone spills ink on his sandal. Coincidence? Babylon says no. The elder priest, you've grown fond of gestures to the stars. "Let them model," he says. "We'll keep watching. The sky has room for both." And maybe it does. As the night deepens, you notice something unusual, a silence between the scholars. Not from tension, but mutual awe. Jupiter glows low in the east. Mars is behaving for once. The moon slides quietly into her phase. And for a moment, Babylonians and Greeks simply watch. No arguments, no measurements, just light, distance, wonder. The ziggurat is quiet tonight. No ceremonies, no squabbling astrologers, no eager apprentices juggling goat-related omens. Just the sound of sandals brushing ancient stone and the occasional whisper of wind threading through the arches. You find yourself back on the upper terrace, seated where you first began. High above the city, just you, the stars, and a vague smell of warm brick and old incense. Above you, the sky stretches like an ancient scroll. You've learned to read some of it now. The scorpion blinks slowly to the south. The great swallow flutters near the river's edge. Mars, thankfully, is behaving again. Venus, just rising quiet, proud, late as usual. And here you are, a traveler wrapped in centuries of sky. A familiar priest settles beside you with a grunt. He doesn't say much, just offers you a cup of something vaguely herbal and highly questionable. You sip. It's not good. It's also not poison, probably. Babylon's hospitality comes with a side of danger and digestive adventure. You both look upward. You've seen the stars. he finally says. But have you seen what they left behind? You know what he means. Not the light, but the legacy. Because Babylon's relationship with the stars wasn't just nightly observation. It was devotion, obsession, and ultimately contribution. Their star charts didn't vanish. Their clay records, dense, dusty, and oddly poetic, passed from one civilization to another. First to the Greeks, then to the Romans, later folded into Islamic astronomy, and eventually into the hands of European scholars who pretended they'd thought of it all themselves. Mainstream historians often acknowledge Babylon as the silent architect of modern astronomy. The sexagesimal system? Babylonian. The zodiac signs? Babylonian roots. Predictive models of eclipses? Straight out of Sapar and Uruk. Even the way we divide circles into 360 degrees, that's ancient Mesopotamian math, written in clay before glass was ever blown. But more than facts, Babylon left behind a way of thinking. A commitment to watching patiently. A willingness to write it down, even if no one would read it for generations. And above all, a belief that time could be felt in light, in patterns, in the silence between Venus and the horizon. You watch as a young apprentice climbs the stairs with a fresh tablet and a stylus, ready to log tonight's configuration. Not because anything dramatic is happening, but because something always might. Fringe researchers sometimes wonder whether Babylon's most valuable contribution wasn't any single technique, but this very habit. The idea that the universe is knowable, bit by bit, night by night. That meaning comes through repetition, through care, through the sacred act of noticing. As the night deepens, a hush settles over the ziggurat. Somewhere far below, a goat bleats in protest. A tablet falls with a gentle clunk. Someone curses softly, but above, the stars keep moving. Some slowly, some mischievously, some not at all. And though Babylon itself will one day fall, its walls worn down by time, its gods renamed, its ziggurats buried beneath dust and forgetting, its sky lives on, not just in telescopes and textbooks, but in every quiet moment when someone looks upward and wonders if time is still tracking them back. Because it is. And now, after all this, after temple towers, moon risings, goat omens, eclipse warnings, and more figs than any human should be expected to digest, you've joined that lineage. You've watched. You've wondered. You've listened. Now you rest. So now, slow your breathing. Let the stars above Babylon fade gently in your mind's eye, their shimmering points of light dimming one by one like lanterns after a long celebration. Picture that smooth stretch of dark sky curving above the ziggurat, cool and vast and still, as if even the universe is ready to sleep. Let your thoughts wander slowly down the wide temple steps, past the silent walls, through the gentle breeze carrying faint traces of myrrh and ancient dust. You hear the soft scrape of a stylus pressing into clay far in the distance. Steady, deliberate, almost like a lullaby, written one wedge at a time. You're no longer watching the stars. You're part of their memory now. The same sky that hovered over Babylon hovers over you, even now, though the cities and names have changed. Let your body sink deeper into comfort. Let your mind soften, like clay left under moonlight. There's no rush, nothing urgent. The planets will keep moving. The constellations will stay just where they need to be. You've seen what the Babylonians saw. You've been part of the quiet rhythm they built, without clocks, without numbers, just trust in the turning of the sky. Let that rhythm carry you now down into sleep, soft, steady, starlit.